are here for class, and so let's start talking about Adobe Premiere. So today we're talking about graphics. We're talking about the idea of how to create graphics, how to adjust graphics, and kind of what the importance of graphics is. Ultimately, from my perspective, it seems pretty obvious why we need to understand graphics for this kind of thing, but when it comes down to it, graphics are all about condensing information, making a video product much easier to consume for the audience, telling a story quickly. Because at the end of the day, video is flashy, but doesn't necessarily contain all the information we need. Or it can take a real lot of work to make a video tell a story where a bit of writing would suffice in the first place. So when we talk about graphics, I want you to think of things like, well, I imagine most of you are familiar with the like tasty videos that are on Facebook and I think Instagram of we have a quick little meal whipped up, beautiful little top-down camera angle, and we just have the ingredients pop up in the top corner. Or think of a news summary where we have just a list of the key points going down the side of the screen while we have someone talking. Or, for example, an Instagram story. Instagram stories are designed to give a whole bunch of information real easily, and very often through text. Commercials do it all the time too. Especially medication, things like travel sites. They throw a lot of graphics up there to create intrigue, to make the story more consumable, without having to go ask for a Hollywood director to come up with the plot and design a basic commercial. When we look at Premiere, we have a lot of tools built into the program that allow us to very quickly just whip up some graphics. So I'm going to play this through. I have it muted just because it's just traffic noise, but I'm just going to play these shots through. So with this little video, we have established where we are. We've established what we're looking at. We've established kind of a news story. We've established what's going on. And we put all this information into 20 seconds of video. As opposed to having someone sit on camera and talk for 30 seconds explaining exactly this. We just create a couple of graphics to tell the story for us. So these graphics themselves are what we are going to create. So going from that, pardon me, we now have to start building in these graphics. The easiest way to build a graphic in Premiere, super straightforward, is the text tool. That is where all your tools are here on this little toolbar in the middle. We just click the T. Sorry, it's a type tool. And with that selected, rather than clicking down in the timeline, we click directly on our image. And it may be hard to see on stream, but I have this little red box here now that indicates I'm good to type. So I'm going to type Dr. Disc. Super straightforward. The thing to note is that now if I want to adjust that, I have to move to my normal selection tool. And it's surrounded by blue. Now, there's all sorts of things we can do with this bit of text. And the way we unlock all those editing abilities is we go up to Window in the top corner. and we scroll down and click Essential Graphics. Opening up Essential Graphics, we're given two main tabs that we can work with. We're given the Browse tab, where we're able to drag in pre-existing templates and presets for graphics. There's a lot of these already built into Premiere that you can make use of. A lot of them are kind of... Oh, I'm touching my face. A lot of them are kind of dorky, a bit corny, a bit old-fashioned, but some of them are actually quite useful. In our case, you'll note that when I created this text, I got this little box down on the main timeline. It's called Dr. Disk. That box indicates our graphic. It's just a graphic layer. So with that selected, we can click on Edit, and we're suddenly given a lot of different controls to adjust our text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on Dr. Disk on the screen to highlight it in red, and then adjust a few things. First of all, I want the text to be a fair bit bigger, so I can either drag this slider down here, or I can type in a number. I'll go for 200. Nice and even, nice and round. I'm also not a big fan of the font here. So I already have some pre-existing fonts that I use. There's a whole list of stuff that you guys have access to. In my case though, I want to go with Montserrat. It's just a nice clean sans serif font. And when I say sans serif, that refers to the idea that my fonts don't have little tails, like Times New Roman or like the one I was just using, Minion. There are no tails on it. It feels very clean. It feels very simple. Once I've selected my font, I can also choose things like font styles. So in this case, I'm going to go for bold. I like extra bold. I can adjust all sorts of other things. I can up in the align and transform settings here. I can center my text both horizontally and vertically. Below that, I can adjust my height or general location, my XY coordinates. We can adjust opacity with that slider at the bottom. There's all sorts of different things we can do here. Fill, for example, if we want to change its color, we can do that. The world's kind of your oyster with the Essential Graphics tool. There's a lot we can do. So I'm going to leave Dr. Disk pretty straightforward here. So you'll notice that, yes, we have a layer down in our main timeline. It shows up pink, nice and pink, very obvious, very clear. If we wanted to add more text to this graphic, we don't necessarily have to build another layer. We can work in the layer that we're in, and in Essential Graphics, click this little page here, under where it says Dr. Disk here. If we click on that, we can build a few different things. Text, vertical text, rectangles, ellipse. We can import graphics from a file. In this case, I'm going to put more text. And you'll note that it, aside from choosing to remain red, it keeps all the same settings we used for the last piece of text, which is actually great for us because I'm only going to adjust a few things on here. First, I'm going to go to my selection tool, just so I can drag it to a location I prefer. I'll double click it, and I'm going to adjust a few things. I'm going to change its size to, let's say, 100 again. Rather than extra bold, let's go with light. Let's change the fill back to white. And while it's highlighted, we can still type. I'm going to type in 20 Wilson Street, Hamilton, Ontario. So one big thing here, actually hold on one second, I'm going to take a sip of water. One big thing here you'll notice here is that as far as our graphic goes, I'm going to center it, our address line is way wider than our title line. And there's a few things we can do to adjust this, because I want them to be pretty rectangular for this shot. Again, if you refer back to the sample, well, it is a bit wider. Things fit nice and concisely in one little spot. So going back to our sequence, what I'm going to do is double click, or Command A, to highlight all of my text and adjust my setting here, which should be that's my tracking. Tracking refers to the distance between any specific letter. So you'll note that the font isn't changing size at all, it's just not so spaced out. So I'm going to reduce that on my subtitle line, or my address line. And in the case of my upper title line, I can just double click on that too, because we're all in the same one layer. I'm going to adjust a couple of things. So first I'm going to double click on, or single click on this double capital T button down here, which is all caps. I prefer all caps for this. And I'm going to increase my kerning on this one. Not a ton, maybe up to 50. So now when we center this one and center this one, they're pretty similar in size. I'm also going to increase the font on Dr. Disk up to 225. Center it again. And let's adjust the Y coordinate so it's down a little bit. Now they're practically the same size. They fit nicely into kind of a box. So on the subject of building a box, let's do exactly that. If I click on that new layer button again, I can select the rectangle instead. And as long as I'm on my selection tool, I can move that wherever I want and adjust it in a whole bunch of different ways. So I can click any of these blue dots to adjust its size. And anyone who's ever played with Photoshop, or even kind of gotten in depth with Premiere, is able to tell you that whatever is the topmost layer, so shape 1 up here, always appears on top. So I can click and drag that below Dr. Disk, and it appears behind. Let's give it a little bit more breathing room on the sides. And that's not terrible. I don't necessarily love the color, the size, all that, but we can work with this. So suddenly, we have a usable graphic. We have a little title card. There are things we can improve here, but that's the basics of it. So the first thing I'm going to do to improve this is, while my shape 1 is selected, I'm going to reduce its opacity, this slider here. I'll reduce that to about 90. Hell, I'll reduce it to 85, just so we can see the background through it very slightly. I'm going to click on the fill. Funny enough, the fill is actually the color I originally planned for this, but let's go a bit darker. I feel like it's too bright. So we could simply select a color on the slider here, adjusting our hue, our saturation, our brightness. Or we can use what's called a hex code. And a hex code is a computer code that's used to define a specific color. So for example, if I go down here, if I go down to this little input box and type 000, or type 0 6 times, I get black. 000 or hextuple 0 is always black on any computer anywhere. And in a similar fashion, 6Fs is always white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for AB, AB, AB. I'm digging that. That's a nice light gray, not quite the same hue that we were working with. Gives us a bit more of a red hue, which I kind of like for this shot. You'll note that one of the resources I gave you on eLearn is a hex code finder. So if you like the color chartreuse, you can type in chartreuse and be given a hex code for it. Similar, well, any other color you wanted. There's all sorts of ways we define colors, and the tool I gave you allows for most of those. So we've changed the color on this. We've changed the opacity a bit. All in all, I'm liking this kind of layout. One thing I do want to do that I did in my first example is I want to add some underline. And unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of being able to, like in Microsoft Word, click an underline button. So instead, we build another rectangle. And with the selection tool highlighted, I'll make the rectangle as long as I want it to be. I'll change the color so I can actually see it on top of my main box. And then I'll adjust the thickness to whatever I want it to be. So for Dr. Disc, I'm going to make it fairly thick so it doesn't stand out too much. I'm going to drag down my Wilson Street line and do the exact same thing. I'll build one more shape, a rectangle. It's already white. I'll make it as long as I need it to be and as thin as I need it to be. And that's a bit thicker than I want. So what I can do is where it says fit here, I can zoom into, let's say 100%, get a better view of what that underline looks like. And rather than try to drag it, I can just adjust the Y coordinate to bring it up and then make sure it's centered horizontally. And if I set that 100% back to fit and deselect, there we go. So the big thing you'll notice between this and the sample I showed at the beginning of this is that they're completely different locations. They look a tad different anyways, but one thing we have to keep in mind is that while we can make all sorts of adjustments in Essential Graphics, at the end of the day, with our layer selected, we can still go into Effect Controls and adjust things too. So if I'm in Effect Controls, I affect everything that's in this layer. If I want to make it bigger, smaller, I can adjust the scale. If I want to adjust the location of everything, I can, which I'm going to do. If I wanted to give everything a slightly lower opacity so that we could see through the words too, I can change mine to 95. And it's barely apparent, but it does make a difference at the end of the day. And suddenly, this is looking, again, aside from that color, very similar to the other shot. Now, ultimately the goal with this is to still show off that mural, to show off the building. So once our shot moves onto it, we don't necessarily want it to be there. But we also don't want this. To have a graphic just kind of disappear very often looks weird. The same way with some cuts between videos can look really weird. We want to kind of smooth it out. And we'll do it the same way, at least for now, stand by till next week. We'll do it the same way that we do transition shots. So we'll go into Video Transitions, Dissolve, and drag across Dissolve just onto the end of that shot. And now, it has a nice fade out rather than a sudden disappearance.